If you're like most horse owners, this time of year you are feeding your horse 100% hay. And one of the big questions that comes up when feeding hay is, how much should I be feeding my horse? Horses have evolved to be grazing animals where they are eating for large chunks of the day. And the food that they are eating should largely be coming from forage, ideally pasture in spring, summer, fall, and hay in the winter. These forage sources provide a large amount of fiber for the horse, which is optimal for the way that their digestive system is set up. But feeding your horse either too much or too little of that forage source can cause an array of issues. So it is very important that you have a good understanding of how much your horse needs and feeding them accordingly. So we're going to start with a general rule of thumb, and then there's going to be a lot of fine print behind that rule of thumb, because as it seems to be with everything horse related, it can never be super straightforward. So when it comes to feeding hay, the general rule of thumb is to feed your horse somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5% of their total body weight. So if you have a horse that is 1,000 pounds, you would be feeding them somewhere between 15 pounds and 25 pounds of hay daily. But with that being said, there is a lot of variation within that rule of thumb and a lot of different factors that your horse might be experiencing that are going to determine whether he should be closer to 15 pounds of hay or 25 pounds of hay. The first thing that you want to consider when determining how much hay to feed your horse is their activity level. So for a lot of horse owners, with the snow, the ice, cold temperatures, shorter daylight hours, all of that combined means we aren't doing a lot with our horses this time of year, and therefore your horse's overall activity level is way down compared to when it would be in the middle of July. And just like with people, if you're not doing as much activity, you do not need as many calories. Therefore, if your horse is just sitting in the pasture this time of year, they're just kind of hanging out, they probably do not need as much as a performance horse that is still getting rode 6 days a week because their very lucky owner has an indoor riding arena and is able to do that. I'm not bitter at all that I don't have an indoor riding arena. It's fine. It's fine. Your horse's age is also going to determine whether they need more or less feed. Older horses tend to have a bit of a slower metabolism, whereas younger horses that are still growing and also might be moving around a lot more, they tend to need a bit more. You also need to consider weather conditions. So how horses keep warm is actually kind of cool. The fermentation process that occurs in their gut generates heat, therefore keeping them warm. So if it is -40 out, it's actually really important that your horse has continual feed during that period of time, so we can continually stoke that fermentation process to keep the horses warm. If on the other hand you have more of a milder winter, which fingers crossed that's what we'll have this year, your horse may not need as much hay just because they're not facing those demands of just trying to stay physically warm. So that's something that you really need to consider. And even within the same winter, you might go through periods of -40 for a week and then temperatures hovering around the freezing point. Your horse's requirements, even through the course of a single winter, may vary as well. So that's something you need to consider. You may be feeding a certain amount at one point in the winter, and that might change depending on how the winter progresses. Another thing you want to consider is your horse's body score. So I've talked about this before. Horses are scored between 1 and 9. 4.5 is the perfect body weight. 9 is a porker and needs to lose weight. Number 1 is very, very anorexic and needs weight put on immediately. So if you have a horse that's on the fatter side and you are trying to get them a little leaner, obviously they should be eating a little bit less. Conversely, if your horse is on the skinny side, and please try, if at all possible, to not let a horse come into winter skinny. Winter is hard on horses that are in ideal condition. It's even harder on horses that are skinny. But if you are in the unfortunate situation where you do have a skinny horse, you're trying to put weight on them, obviously they're going to need more calories to try and put some meat on their bones. Another thing you really need to consider is what kind of hay are you feeding? If you are feeding a very, very high quality, nutrient dense alfalfa, that's going to have a lot more calories per pound than something that's maybe more of like a slewgrass cow hay kind of situation, which ideally you should not be feeding your horse cow hay, but definitely alfalfa is going to have more calories than some sort of grass hay or a lower quality hay. You want to be very considerate of that. You don't want to be feeding the same poundage of hay in alfalfa as you would grass hay. Your horse is going to need more grass hay to get those nutrients that the similar amount of alfalfa. One question that does come up with this is, how do I measure my hay? And I have a couple of suggestions for you. So one, it's easier if you have square bales, obviously, because they're just in flakes. It's a little bit more difficult if you have a round bale, but if you have flakes, you can literally just weigh it on a scale. Either, you could take your bathroom scale out to the barn, weigh yourself, and then weigh yourself with, a couple flakes of hay. The difference in those two weights will be the weight of those couple flakes of hay, and then you'll have, kind of an idea of how much your flakes of hay weigh. Another option would be to get a luggage weight and put some hay in a hay bag and weigh the hay bag. That will give you an idea on, this much hay weighs this much. So those are a couple of ideas. You might need to invest in, one of those luggage weight things or something like that, but it's going to be worth it if you're going to be more accurately feeding your horse. And just a couple of things to keep in mind before we do wrap up with this one. As I mentioned at the top, horses have evolved to be grazing animals. Their digestive systems have evolved to take in forage constantly throughout the day. A big mistake that people make is, giving their horse one big meal a day. That is not ideal for horses. Ideally, you want to be feeding them 2+ times a day in smaller meals so that they have that constant source of forage coming in. Their gut will be a lot happier if you do that. I would discourage you from just plunking a full round bale into a pen with your horse, because one, you're not weighing it. You have no control over how much your horse is eating. I also find there's a lot of waste when you do something like that. An alternative in that situation would be to buy some sort of slow feeder hay net. I know those are very popular right now. That gives you the ability to put a full round bale out, but it prevents your horse from completely pigging out on it in the course of 2 days. It slows down their rate of feeding, and again, helps to promote them having that constant source of forage throughout the day without you having to, do a bunch of moving hay around constantly all the time for them. I hope this was helpful. Again, it is very, very important to weigh your hay to know how much your horse is eating and to be able to properly manage their body score throughout the winter, which can be a challenge, particularly if the weather is extra nasty, which fingers crossed it is not this year. And I know it is a pain in the butt to weigh your hay, but like I said, once you weigh it once or twice, kind of get a feel for how much your hay weighs, it'll be very easy for you to look at a quantity of hay and have a good idea of how much it weighs, and then just kind of eyeball it from there. But I definitely recommend in the beginning here, weigh your horse's hay. Start with maybe, if they weigh 1,000 pounds, starting with maybe 20 pounds of hay per day, and then kind of adjusting from there depending on the things that we talked about today.